Hi, I'm James Dunn. Welcome to the Inside Network. Welcome to INDepth, and my guest is Scott Bennett, Head of Quantitative Research and Client Solutions Australasia at Northern Trust Asset Management. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, James. Pleasure to be here.
Scott, we're talking today about the pathway to decarbonisation. And I wanted to start with asking, institutional investors are widely considered to really hold the key to a low carbon future. That's evident by the tremendous increase in pledges over the last 12 to 18 months to reach the net zero targets by 2050. What do you think is the major force contributing to this momentum?
Yeah, we see a combination of forces both coming from top down and also bottom up. So from a top down perspective, we see a lot of legislative and regulatory frameworks being established to really support the net zero initiative. And specifically in Europe, we've just had the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Reporting Requirements come through, or SFDR. We've seen similar legislation come through in New Zealand as well, which will take effect next year. And then also locally here in Australia, we've also had some notable court cases that have actually recognised that climate risk needs to be part of the overall investment considerations for superannuation funds. So we are seeing increasing pressure coming from top down, but increasingly we're also seeing a lot of demand coming bottom up. So investors are making conscious decisions in terms of how they consume goods and services and aligning with low carbon emissions or more sustainable options. And that's also coming through in terms of what they're looking for from investment solutions as well, especially for some of those younger investors. And then finally, outside of the top-down and bottom-up influences, I think what we've seen over the last few years is just a much greater alignment across the investment industry around how we can collectively work together to achieve some of these goals and actually get better frameworks and establishments around what is required and how we get there.
Scott, what are some of the biggest challenges faced by asset owners when they come to think about reaching their targets?
The biggest challenge we see with asset owners when they come to think about it is, where do I start? And for us, we believe the best place to start is by actually measuring what those carbon exposures are across the portfolio. To that end, what gets measured, we find gets managed. And so once you start measuring those exposures, that'll begin the pathway to actually start to manage some of those exposures. And then the next biggest challenge that we see a lot of investors is really understanding how carbon emissions or ESG criteria get implemented and integrated across an entire investment program. Understanding that that's not just about identifying which companies to include or exclude, but how you engage with companies on certain issues, how you measure risks and those types of issues.
A very common and consistent impediment that's been identified by asset owners in trying to reach their net zero goal is uncertainty about the pathway to achieving it. So, in your opinion, how should asset owners look to approach that pathway?
Yeah, in terms of how we get to net zero by 2050, I think the one thing we can agree on is it's not going to be a straight line. So between now and 2050, over the next 30 years, we're going to see a lot of evolution in terms of what those strategies look like. What we do know is that the imperative is that we must act now. So in order to meet those lofty goals of net zero by 2050, the work has to start today. And so the big considerations for a lot of investors is, how do I make sure that I'm managing my short-term risks? And how do I also ensure that while I'm divesting from carbon-intensive sectors, that I'm not also divesting from some of the biggest opportunities? So I mentioned before that the largest carbon-intensive sectors are energy, materials and utilities. So they pose the biggest emission risks, but they're also where the biggest climate change opportunities are going to reside. So a lot of the technological developments, the innovation are going to reside in those sectors. So the big challenge for investors is not only avoiding the risks, but making sure that you're gaining exposure to those opportunities.
And that's a problem, isn't it? Because a lot of people at the outset of this journey take what to them seems to be the logical first step of excluding or divesting out of fossil fuels. So that simple, logical first step that appeals to a lot of people, what are some of the challenges inherent in that too simplistic, immediate decarbonisation approach?
Yeah, so the challenges are that, one, there's an investment challenge associated with that. So by simply divesting, you've got to reallocate that capital somewhere within the portfolio, and typically that's just prorated against whatever's left in the benchmark or whatever's left in the portfolio, and it's not really focused on the investment merit of those companies. So we think that one of the big opportunities for investors is to make sure that while it's not just about divesting, it's about identifying those opportunities that are not just sustainable, but also profitable as well. And so how do you go about identifying the profitable opportunities going forward? And we think that we have some unique insights around certain factors or certain investment styles that work really well with that type of solution.
Scott, due to the nature of the exclusions, most decarbonisation solutions can have inherent sector biases, such as an overweight to financials or an underweight to energy, materials and utilities, and that in return can expose the portfolio to uncompensated risks. So what should be taken into consideration when looking to develop a solution?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and one that's often lost on a lot of investors when they're looking into this space. So as you pointed out quite rightly, the most carbon intensive sectors in the market are energy, materials and utilities, and the least carbon intensive is financials. But even though those exposures alone carry with them a whole lot of macro level risks, such as exposure to commodity prices and exposure to interest rates in particular, which are highly volatile in their own right. So investors need to take a fully integrated approach when considering their pathway to net zero. So understanding that it's not just about avoiding some of those climate related risks, but actually understanding what other risks you may be bringing into the portfolio or introducing to the portfolio. And that's why we advocate strongly for an integrated approach, so that we can not just manage the sustainability risks, but also the investment risks that are attached to the portfolio.
What does a fully integrated approach to this really entail?
Yeah, it entails a lot. So in order to get fully integrated, what we need to do is we need to line up our sustainable objectives alongside our investment objectives. And at times, they can often be conflicting. So while we want to achieve good sustainable outcomes, we also need to achieve those investment objectives of delivering long-term returns for underlying investors in the portfolios. And so what we need to do there is we need to not only look at what those sustainability issues are, but we need to look at the risks associated with that. We need to look at the returns that are associated with that and actually integrate that into one portfolio. And portfolio construction becomes key in terms of meeting, incorporating not just multiple metrics, but also multiple objectives.
Do you think being a quantitative systematic manager gives you an advantage at all in implementing solutions to meet net zero targets?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's a highly sophisticated problem we're trying to solve, because it's not just a climate related problem, it's also an investment problem as well. And when we think about just the size of the market, there's over 10,000 companies listed on global stock exchanges around the world. So within that, the vast number of companies that need to be considered and the vast array of data items that need to be considered to effectively make those evaluations is extremely vast. So quantitative strategies naturally lend themselves to consuming a lot of data, but not only consuming a lot of data, but actually interpreting that data, standardising it, and actually packaging it into an investment that can achieve multiple objectives. And that's where more sophisticated quantitative approaches can be really helpful for investors looking for those solutions that not only incorporate sustainability but profitability as well.
Scott, the verdict is in on ESG not affecting returns over the long term, and it's really solved that issue for investors that they might have felt they had to forego returns to adopt an ESG approach. How far down the track do you think decarbonisation is to delivering the same kind of comfort to investors that they don't have to forego returns?
Yeah, I think when it comes to returns, it's not so much in terms of how much will it cost, but I think it really, over the long term, we don't expect that a decarbonisation portfolio would perform any worse than a fully carbon loaded portfolio. Actually, if anything, there's a very strong case to make that those companies that are better positioned for an energy transition are likely to perform better. So I think the investment case is very strong for a decarbonisation portfolio, but the big challenge is over the long term, how do you manage those short-term risks to make sure that you can take advantage of those long-term opportunities?
ESG data has this problem, but within that emissions data must also have the problem of can it really ever have the same veracity as financial data? Do you think that those kinds of data will ever be standardised and we could get to the stage where, like a AAA credit rating is accepted and standardised, that an ESG or emissions rating can have the same kind of status?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of development in terms of data both on the emissions and ESG side over the last 10 years. And I think where we are now relative to even 5 years ago is leaps and bounds ahead in terms of the quality of the data. And we've had really good initiatives in the market to help drive that. I call out the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP, which has really driven more consistency in a lot of that emissions data. But we have very good coverage, so we have very good quantity and very good quality of data at the moment. The one challenge we don't have, or one challenge we do have with ESG data is actually getting a framework where that can be aggregated in a consistent manner. And so this would be very similar to what we've seen for financial data, where you have things like accounting standards that start to get more consistency in terms of how companies report and also how investors interpret that data. And so we've had a couple of really key initiatives come through with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, and also the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, that have really driven investors and companies to get better aligned in terms of what they report and how that data gets utilised from an investment framework. And to that point, Northern Trust has been doing a lot of work in this space, and we've recently launched our own proprietary ESG score, which is the Northern Trust ESG Vector Score, and it explicitly aligns with both the TCFD and the SASB frameworks to give that consistency to investors in terms of the scores and things that we're measuring are aligned with those broader industry initiatives.
Scott Bennett, thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, James.